it's lights out and away we go. Who's going to be last on the brakes?
What does it take to win?
They're going wheel to wheel, and they are going to win. Records are there to be broken. Unbelievable stuff.
What does it take to be the
The
best?
man who was in last place at the end of lap 1 comes home to win. Down the inside, that is the best move of the lot.
What does it take to build a legacy?
He is someone that will be remembered forever.
And more importantly, what does it cost? As it turns out, the answer to all of these lies at the heart of an entirely different question. And to find out what the answer is, we have to start with a quiet and humble driver named Jules Bianchi.
So you've been racing since you were 3.5. Will you be Formula One world champion, do you think, in your heart?
Well,
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Born in Nice, France, Jules Bianchi would begin racing at the young age of only 3 years old. With his father owning a karting track and his family history including 2 successful racers from the 60s, Bianchi was born with racing in his blood. Like most F1 drivers, he would start his racing career in the karting circuit and would quickly prove that he was destined for more. In 2007, Bianchi would see his last karting circuit close with an impressive performance, seeing him take 11 podium finishes of the 13 races in the circuit, with 5 of those seeing him cross the finish line first. With the impressive results and lightning speed grabbing plenty of attention, it wasn't long before he also drew the attention of talent manager Nicholas Todd. With Bianchi's obvious skill, the following year would see him graduate to his first single-seater racing opportunity in Formula 3 with Art Grand Prix, where he would win the annual Masters of Formula 3 race and finish 3rd overall in the Euro season for his rookie debut. His first full season with the team would see him leading the way with 9 wins in the 24-race series, but much more importantly, he finally got to take his first big step towards his ultimate dream of being an F1 driver. But being an F1 driver is only a small part of why Jules' story is worth telling.
Tries to fight back and then sees Charles Leclerc swoop past him. Now he pulls out. It's wheel to wheel. Down into Brooklyn's Leclerc.
This is Charles Leclerc, and in the year 2000, he faked being sick to stay home from school. With his father having planned to visit a close friend at the nearby karting track, and despite playing hooky for the day, he would take his first spin in a go-kart and wouldn't stop until the tank ran dry. As chance would have it, it was the same go-kart track owned by Jules Bianchi's father, and Leclerc would get his first taste of racing with his kart tethered by a rope to the more experienced Bianchi in front of him. Jules took on the role of a mentor to the young Leclerc, and as they both grew, they continued to grow ever closer. When Leclerc began karting competitively in 2004, it was Jules who would serve as his kart engineer for his first ever competitive race. Charles' older brother Lorenzo would become Bianchi's best friend. Their families would grow closer together over time at the track, and eventually, Jules would be named Charles' godfather as recognition and acknowledgement of his dedication and investment in mentoring the young Leclerc. While he gave a great deal of time to the promising prospect through his teens, Jules' trajectory would see his next step taking him literally around the world as he continued racing towards his dream. In addition to his championship performance in Formula 3, Bianchi's skill would land him a seat at Ferrari as a test driver, and he would be so impressive in his practice sessions that he would go on to become the first ever driver selected for Ferrari's newly formed F1 Driver Academy program. When Bianchi graduated to Formula 2, his first season would be littered with misfortune that would see his race come to an early end in 5 of the 20 races that season, and he would be forced to sit out an additional 6 to recover from a rather dramatic accident. However, even with only 14 of his 20 races seeing him cross the finish line, he would still fight his way all the way to a 3rd place finish overall in the season and repeat that placement again the following year. With Bianchi proving he could finish in the points as long as he had a machine that could compete with the field, Ferrari opted to throw Jules in the deep end and set him up with the Tech 1 racing team for the Renault 3.5 series. With the Drivers' Championship coming down to the last race of the season, Jules would only narrowly miss out on the championship after crashing in that final race. Though it is probably worth noting that the driver that crashed into him was also the points leader he was battling against at the time. If not for being disqualified from the first race of that season due to an engineering issue out of his control, it's fair to say that Jules would have taken home the championship title for his rookie debut and his first time behind the wheel of a car comparable to Formula 1 power. It was an extremely unfortunate end to an otherwise impressive season. But by 2012, Jules had become the test driver for F1's Force India and had already proven he was ready to race among the absolute best in the world. Catching the attention of the small F1 upstart Marussia team, Jules would start 2013 for the first time ever as a Formula One driver, with his sights set on Ferrari as soon as he was able to prove himself. But with Bianchi's career just beginning to really take off, it seemed as if Charles Leclerc's was about to come to an abrupt end. For all its excitement and spirit, the difficulty of succeeding in racing as a sport is that it's also incredibly expensive to participate in. And though Leclerc had been proving to be an elite prospect in the karting circuit, the limited sponsorships available weren't enough to offset the significant out-of-pocket costs that come along with competing. So despite Leclerc's father sacrificing everything he could to keep Charles on the track, the family simply didn't have the money to make the move to the next step of competition. With the bright future Jules had in front of him, he reached out to his manager, Nicolas Todt, and pleaded with him to sponsor the young Leclerc so he could prove himself at the next level. While Todt didn't have any immediate interest in sponsoring a driver he knew little about, Todt eventually agreed as a favor to Bianchi. And as long as Jules was proving he could compete at the highest levels, Leclerc would have the benefit of an opportunity to play catch-up and prove that he also belonged in a car alongside him. So for his debut season in F1, Bianchi was racing for far more than just himself. Now, before going into Bianchi's career as an F1 driver, it's also worth looking at how drivers score points, and perhaps more importantly, which drivers are expected to score points. In an effort to attract more fans and financial investment, 2010 saw a major expansion to the number of teams on the grid for the first time in almost 20 years, and the first new teams period since 1998. But as mentioned previously, racing is expensive. Racing in F1 considerably more so. So of the 4 new teams that were added during the 2010 expansion, only 3 secured enough funding to make it to the regular season. And by 2013, when Jules joined Marussia, only 2 of them were left. And of those 2, neither had ever placed high enough in their 3 years on the track to score even a single point towards a team championship. In contrast, the top 4 teams over the same stretch were responsible for 82% of the points scored, despite only representing 23% of the drivers in the field. While there are lots of reasons as to why this is the case, the shortest answer is money. Long-standing teams with significant financial backing from major motor racing corporations simply provide an opportunity to secure the best parts, performers, and personnel that are required to stretch the limits of how fast you can go. So for drivers like Jules, who had already secured close ties to Ferrari, his time at Marussia was less about winning races and more about seeing if he could squeeze a competitive performance out of a significantly inferior machine. Nobody really believed that anyone could actually score points in the Marussia. 4 teams were added to the grid in Formula One, and going into the 6th race of the 2014 season, not one of them had scored even a single point. Until Monaco.
And now 5 lights ahead of the drivers. It's lights out and away we go. We did say, didn't we, at the start of this season, would this be the year that Marussia crack it? Look, here's Jules Bianchi now, round Sander Vaught. Can he get ahead of Jean-Eric Vergne? Bianchi does move ahead into 12th place.
After being forced to start in last place for changing out a bad gearbox, the first 40 laps saw Jules fighting his way to the middle of the field in a back-of-the-pack car. Jules was seizing every opportunity in front of him and giving nothing back. And with just 30 laps to go, his team finally gave him permission to drive.
Concentrate, try to open the gap. We are in the points, so keep pushing.
Oh, and they're down the inside goes the Marussia, barging and bumping. Kamui Kobayashi out of the way, and Jules Bianchi now up into 8th place for Marussia. Jules Bianchi had the points for the first time in Formula One, but he'll now see the checkered flag.
We have P9, very good race, Jules.
Finally 11 points. I'm so happy.
Following an absolutely otherworldly performance, Jules' reputation for being a talented and prodigal driver was secured. And when it was announced that Ferrari driver Fernando Alonso's seat would be open the following season, and Bianchi having been part of the Ferrari Driver Academy since 2009, many were excited to see what the Frenchman could do when given the opportunity to pilot one of the absolute best engines on the track. And after proving he had what it takes to wrestle a car that should struggle to even qualify all the way up to a top 10 finish, Jules knew that all he had to do was finish the 2014 season strong, and it was likely he'd have a new home at Ferrari the following year. However, the 15th race of the season was none other than the technically demanding SAZUKA circuit, a track with a storied history, and due to its late placement in the season, also often sees some of the most competitive driving, as numerous F1 champions have clinched their title on this fabled track. But when it was raining, SAZUKA had a different reputation.
3.6 miles of SAZUKA, full of rivers across the track, puddles forming, it is raining hard.
Rain falls down here in SAZUKA, 53 laps away.
In the rain, it's terrifying.
It's raining, and it is raining hard.
Treacherous conditions.
I can tell you the situation is deteriorating.
Well, you can see just how gloomy it has got.
It is much wetter than before. Be very careful.
Despite starting the race behind the safety car, and the average lap pace being more than a minute slower than normal race conditions, after just the third lap, the race was stopped due to unsafe conditions, as drivers were having difficulty just keeping their cars on the track. Drivers patiently awaited word on when or if the race would resume, and after about 15 minutes, patients would see the rain subside. As traction on the course improved, it was thought that the race would come to a proper finish. But it wasn't long before the rain came roaring back, and on the 43rd lap of the race, driver Adrian Sutil's car crashed into the safety barrier on turn 7 after hydroplaning off the course. Fortunately, Sutil hadn't been injured, and engineers brought a JCB onto the track to begin the process of removing Sutil's car from the barricade. Unfortunately, the JCB's placement on the inside of the safety barrier meant that when Jules Bianchi lost control in wet conditions just one lap later, there was no safety barricade to crash into.
I was already screaming on the radio 5 laps before the safety car. A controversial race run amid monsoon-like conditions.
There is a question of if race organizers should have halted the race as the weather conditions worsened.
After sitting in the wreckage of his car for almost 15 minutes, Jules was taken to a local hospital by ambulance over the course of a 22-minute drive. It was later revealed that the emergency evacuation helicopter that would have cut down the extraction and transport time was unavailable, as it was unable to take off due to the weather. Family and friends that were able were quick to arrive shortly after, and a statement issued confirmed that Jules had been rushed into emergency surgery. He would then be placed in an artificial coma, and 6 weeks later was breathing on his own and considered stable enough for aeromedical transfer back to his home country of France. Now surrounded by friends and family all praying for his recovery, there was nothing anyone could do but wait and hope. Shortly after, an FIA investigation would be launched to determine what caused the accident that nearly killed Jules Bianchi. While the report cited multiple contributing factors, of the 11 conclusions listed in the official report, 4 of them seemed to strongly indicate that Bianchi was at fault for failing to slow, not observing yellow flags, and overcorrecting after loss of control. With the report's significant emphasis on driver error, it's no surprise that the vast majority of reporting that followed would lead with this explanation. Of the 7 remaining conclusions, 3 of them essentially covered that the race officials had done nothing wrong, and the decisions leading up to the moment of impact were consistent with standard safety protocols. Of the remaining 2 factors outlined in the report that don't directly implicate the brake system failsafe not engaging when it should have, they serve as an odd combination of specifically how Bianchi's head hit the JCB, and what is best summed up by the statement, "It is considered fundamentally wrong to try and make an impact between a racing car and a large and heavy vehicle survivable." What doesn't seem to have been covered is that while there were double yellow flags waving this section before turn 7, the officials' tower directly above Sutil's crash site had switched to green flags as Sutil's car was being cleared 11 seconds before the crash took place. It doesn't include how additional specific precautions had been taken following a similar accident taking place on the same track, on the same turn, and in much better conditions some years ago. It doesn't provide insight on how specifically Bianchi failed to slow when his racing teammate and other drivers in the exact same place had rounded the corner faster. And it doesn't mention why half of the people on the accident panel represent clear potential for conflicts of interest, why the race officiant wasn't included among them, why evacuation took so long, or why the race was even held in such conditions when it had already been confirmed that emergency medical aerovac wasn't available. But perhaps those points are included in the full 300-page report, and they were simply skipped in the 1.5-page summary provided to the public. Regardless of why it happened, the unfortunate truth of top-tier competition is that the show must go on, and the following week would see his fellow racers wishing him well, hoping for a swift recovery, and then continuing on to do their best to finish the season. And while he may have been decidedly more impacted by the accident, the same was true for Charles Leclerc, who at this point had gone on to impress in his early karting career, graduated to the Junior Series in the Renault 2.0, and in only a handful of races as a guest driver in the Junior Series, scored enough points in 5 finishes to place 5th overall in the 20-race season. From there, he'd continue on in the footsteps of Jules before him and add his name to the short list of drivers chosen to take part in the Ferrari Driver Academy program. Charles was doing his part, making sure that when Jules recovered, he'd be ready to fulfill their intertwining destinies and take his place alongside him as they raced for Ferrari together. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, fate would render its final verdict.
The world of motorsport gathered in Nice today for the funeral of F1 driver Jules Bianchi. The 25-year-old Frenchman died on Friday after having spent 9 months in a coma following a crash at the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix.
Seen as one of the rising stars of Formula One.
Bianchi had been in a coma since the accident at SAZUKA last October.
The world of motorsport is today mourning the loss of a talented young
until the walls come down.
Jules Bianchi would have a funeral service in Nice and be buried in Monaco. In the following race, the drivers of Formula One would gather together and bid their farewell to a strong competitor, to a supportive colleague, to a friend, to a son. And the story for the quiet and humble French driver that Ferrari was grooming for a seat at the very top came to an end. That same year, Leclerc would take the weight of Jules' legacy on his shoulders, and racing for the same art team that Jules had raced for before him, he would take 4th place overall in his rookie season and go on to win the Formula 3 championship the year after. Motivated to live out the dream that they had once hoped to share together, Leclerc would then go on to absolutely dominate in Formula 2, taking home the Drivers' Championship in his first year, on his way to winning the Autosports Award for Rookie of the Year. Absolutely everything was on track for Charles to make good on the vision his godfather had had for him, and Charles was poised to enter Formula One with the same hype and expectations that Jules had carried in as well. But before he could take the last step to follow in Bianchi's footsteps, misfortune would find Charles once more.
I lost my father in 2017, and to lose him at that age, I was just a kid. As soon as he passed away, I asked myself, what would he want me to do? And I had no doubts. I mean, there was only one answer. He loved so much racing, and he loved seeing me racing. And that gave me an extra motivation as well, to make him proud from up there. So it was super important for me to do that.
While sitting alongside his father on his deathbed and at the end of a long battle with cancer, Charles Leclerc did something out of character. He lied to his father. To comfort him, to give him peace that his sacrifices were all worth it, to make him proud. He told his father that he had signed an F1 contract. Though Leclerc would speak about how horrible he felt after lying to his father, he knew he was going to make it a reality. And 2 days after his father passed away, it was now Leclerc that would be racing for more than just himself. After all of the challenges he had faced, after all of the hardship he had endured, and after all of the setbacks he had overcome, pushing forward was all he had left. And now, in the same season that he would go on to win the Formula 2 championship, he would also claim victory in a race just 2 days after his father had passed away. It was only 6 short months later that he would fulfill his promise to his father. Though neither Jules or his father would get to see it, Charles would officially make it to F1 and sign a contract to race for Sauber Alfa Romeo for the 2018 season. Just like Jules before him, he would carry the slower engine into point-scoring positions, and after a wildly impressive year, it finally happened. After just his first year in Formula 1, Leclerc would find himself in the red car as a driver for Scuderia Ferrari.
For the first time ever, Charles Leclerc wins a Formula 1 Grand Prix.
I was extremely happy, but at the same time, it was a tricky situation with what had happened. A dream come true for sure.
It's a finger raised to the heavens by Charles Leclerc.
And while he would go on to claim 2 wins and 10 podiums in that first season with Ferrari, his drive to win would reach an apex in 2022, as he would fall shy of the F1 championship with only 7 races where he crossed the finish line, not also seeing him to the podium. And while his success would make good on the white lie he told his father and would serve to honor the memory of his godfather Jules, there was a looming symbol of his arrival at the top that had continued to elude him. As the only monogas driver on the grid and the first to start an F1 engine in almost 30 years, he dreamed to be the first in over 90 years to win the fabled Monaco Grand Prix. There could be no better way to fulfill the hopes that everyone had had for him than by bringing home a win at his native track. It was this final wall that Leclerc could not break through. Year after year after year, it seemed that there was always something that kept him from this symbolic win. The same streets he grew up on. The same streets that Jules had demonstrated a will to win that surely would have landed him in the seat that Charles now sat. The same streets that his father had driven to bring him to the track in his earliest days of karting. The question of whether or not Leclerc was good had already been answered, but Charles had put himself under pressure to become the hero that all those close to him had always thought him to be. And now, all that was left to prove it to himself was Monaco.
The great motor races begins in 5 lights time. And the Monaco Grand Prix is underway. In 2017, Charles Leclerc lost his father, and in these final days, he told his father a white lie, that he'd made it to Formula 1. It wasn't true then, but his driving has made it true now. The grandstands he saw built as a kid now rise for him, and for the first time in 93 years, this fabled race is won by one of their own. Well done, Charles Leclerc. You've got that one forever.
Following Jules Bianchi's tragic passing, testing began for what would eventually come to be known as the Halo, a titanium wishbone that sits above the cockpit meant to protect drivers from significant head trauma during severe collisions. While it was thought it could end up being several seasons before it truly proved its value, it actually got its first test in the same season it was implemented in 2018. In only the 11th race, an FIA investigation report concluded that in the lap 1 pileup that saw a car go airborne, the vehicle's nose fin would have collided with the driver underneath, and without the halo would almost certainly have killed the driver. The halo having saved him from the front fin of the car shearing his helmet in half. That driver was none other than Charles Leclerc.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys.
After taking on Charles as a favor to Jules in 2011, Nicolas Todt still manages Charles Leclerc to this day, and has gone on record as saying that Leclerc is the smartest investment he's ever made. After a significant time away and having sworn off racing following their son's death, Bianchi's parents would find healing and closure in their family's deep connections to the Leclercs, and would return to watching F1 races to cheer on the driver that got his start at their track more than 20 years prior. And unwilling to forget the path that he walked to get here, Leclerc would also follow in Jules' footsteps once more, by not only returning to karting tracks to inspire young drivers, but also for charity endeavors to raise funds for the newly formed Jules Bianchi Foundation, an organization that contributes funding for the research, prevention, and treatment of injuries similar to the one that took Jules' life. And in many ways, Jules continues to show that he's still with us. He's just one lap ahead. And with Jules Bianchi still looking out for his godson after all this time, perhaps you can look out for me by leaving a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And with that, I believe my job here is done, and until I see you next time, party on.
Will you be Formula 1 World Champion, do you think, in your heart?
Well, I don't want to say I will, because it's wrong for me to say that. Nobody knows, but for sure I want. And I will do all what I can to become one day. And if I can't, I will have no regrets.